Okay, good morning. My name is Becky Kent and I'm the chair of the Halifax Water Board. Welcome to our March 24th, 2022 meeting at Halifax Water. We would like to acknowledge this land on which Halifax Water operates and provides services is the traditional land of the Mi'kmaq people. We make this acknowledgement to reaffirm our commitment to and responsibility in improving relationships and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. This meeting is open to the public. If you're virtual, you can view it online on our online platform. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Halifax Water's YouTube channel. Sorry about that. The agenda and materials for this meeting are posted in the Halifax Water website. So we'll now proceed with today's agenda. Our first item is in our regular reports is a ratification of our in-camera motions. So we'll need someone to move that forward. Do you have any volunteers?
I can move that.
Okay, Commissioner Cuddle.
Forward. Sorry, I just lost my diligent here.
So it would be motion to that Halifax Water Board ratify the in-camera motions.
Right, there we go. Got diligent back here. Okay, I move that Halifax Water Board ratify the in-camera motions.
Second.
Sorry, who was that?
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon. Second. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. 1B, we'll need the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Do we have any changes, any additions or deletions? I don't think we do. Nope. Would someone like to move that?
I can move the Halifax Water Board approve the order of business and approve the additions and deletions.
Thank you, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon. A seconder?
Commissioner Rawlings can second.
Thank you, Commissioner Rawlings. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Now moving forward to approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on Thursday, January 27th. Are there any questions on that one? We'll need someone to make that motion.
Well, shall I go for three, I guess?
Okay.
Make a motion that the Halifax Water Board approve the minutes of January 27th, 2022 regular meeting.
With the seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Kostya Zakharov. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The motion's carried. Now moving to business arising from the minutes. I don't think we have any. And seeing nothing further, we'll move on now to 4.1, operating results for the 11 months ended February 28th, 2022. And we have discussion on that.
So good morning, Louis DeMontbrin. I'm the Director of Corporate Services and the CFO, and you have quite an extensive report in your package. I just wanted to run through and highlight a couple of the key issues. So one of the first ones I usually start with is our cash position continues to be very healthy. We have approximately $70.6 million in the bank as of the end of February, which is a very healthy position. As always, I reference that a significant portion of that relates to the RDCs that have been collected. So we continue to manage our overall cash position, including those additional funds. The second area I tried to highlight is accounts receivable. So our accounts receivable at the end of February are at about $11.5 million. It is an increase year over year, mostly related to the stormwater billing that we do at this time of the year. This year we were ahead of where we were last year in terms of our billing. So you'll see an increase in the number of customers that have outstanding accounts or receivable accounts, and the balance at this time of year. The next item I wanted to flag specifically was related to our debt. So our debt position year over year is consistent. It's approximately $224 million in total. That is almost identical to where we were at this time last year. So we continue to be in a very good financial position on the debt side. Moving into the operating accounts, we continue to track to our forecast as of the end of December, which was a deficit of about $4.4 million. We're currently at a deficit at the end of February of about 1.9 million, almost 2 million, which is exactly where we'd expect to be. There will be fluctuations as we get to the end of the year, but right now we believe that we continue to be at around that $4.4 million deficit. And then as we look through into the operating side, one area that I've flagged several times is there is a table number, I'm not exactly sure, just after table number 4, there's a highlight on consumption year over year. We continue to see an increase in overall consumption over last year. What we're also seeing is a return to more normal consumption patterns. So the residential consumption has gone down to be more consistent to what it would have been in the past. We continue to see improvements in the commercial and the industrial sector. So exactly where we'd expect to be as we transition back to a more normal environment. The only other area I wanted to flag, near the end of the presentation in table 7, we show the operating results by service. What I wanted to highlight is we are continuing to track to have a surplus on the wastewater service side of the business, which is good news. We've forecasted that we'd have a surplus of over $1.4 million, and we're seeing that it's coming in as of the end of February at about $384,000. So that's good news from our perspective. That's all I was going to say. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Louis. And see, we have a question from Commissioner Rawlings.
Thank you, Louis. Just a question on page 15 of the report, or page 42 of the package. It just had a comment. The note B of table 14 said the revenues were decreasing on unregulated activities. Any comment if this is kind of a one-time thing until we get back to normal operating, or will we be watching if we need to increase rates on some of the unregulated activities?
We are continuing to manage or to monitor the surpluses that we make from our different regulatory services or unregulated services. What we've been seeing is some of the septic tipping has been decreasing in terms of people. When this has happened over the last couple of years, people have been taking their septic to other communities rather than through HRM or through Halifax Water. The other thing we're monitoring is the cost of treating airline effluent is becoming higher based on what we've traditionally had. So we continue to monitor it, but the revenues have been decreasing over the last few years.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Kostya. Sorry. Can you hear me, Commissioner? Okay.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I had lost my connection.
I think you have a, did you have a, oh no, it was just lost a connection. Thank you. Any further questions on this? Hey, thank you, Louis. And we'll now move on to 4.1. Sorry, 4.2. Spring debenture.
So I can start this one. This item has a motion that will need to be approved, but I will talk to it first if you like. We are looking for approval from the board to borrow $15.7 million in the spring debenture. So the Municipal Finance Corporation, which is the provincial entity that municipalities borrow through, does borrowings twice a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. This year, we're looking to borrow approximately $15.7 million in the spring, and we need approval for that. As we talked about in the budget, we are changing our approach in terms of the term over which, or the period in which we amortize our debt. So traditionally, we have used a 20-year amortization period, meaning that debt will be decreased over those 20 years. What we're proposing to use here is a 30-year amortization period. We did flag this item when we went through our budget conversations. But what that does is it ties our debt issue more closely to the life of the assets that we're purchasing, which is spreads the costs over a longer period of time, does decrease the costs to the operating side of the budget because we spread out the principal repayments. Overall, it does increase the interest we pay because obviously we're paying interest on debt over 30 years instead of over 20. But in terms of the overall approach or impact on our customers, we believe it's the right thing to do. So we went through that on the budget side. This is the first debt issue that we're looking to do with that longer 30-year amortization period. So I wanted to make sure that was flagged. The second component relates to our balloon payments. So as we amortize our debt over these periods, there is a halfway point where we need to renew and re-borrow the money that's remaining at the halfway point. Those are called the balloon payments. So we have balloon payments of about $17.2 million that we also are looking for approval to borrow. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Louis? Commissioner Rob?
Yeah, Louis, from a financial standpoint, underspend on one of the budgets, for instance, on the capital budget, how is it being treated on the debt side? If the capex budget is underspent, is the debt is being returned ahead of time, or we just, or Halifax Water still maintains the debt?
So when we developed the capital budget, we outlined the future funding sources. So some of the projects we've talked about are funded by either regional development charges or debt or depreciation. So we identify those funding sources. We only issue debt when the projects have been completed. So if the spend doesn't happen, we don't borrow. When we make the decisions to borrow, we look at our overall cash position. So when we just went through the operating results, I referenced we had about $70.5 million in cash. We take that into consideration in terms of when we issue debt. But we will only borrow when the project has completed.
Thank you.
Any further questions from anyone? Okay, seeing none, we'll need someone to put that motion on the floor.
Commissioner Rawlings can put that motion.
Thank you.
The motion is that the Halifax Water Board approve the financing of $15,749,000 with a 30-year amortization term and finance over 10 years. The maximum all-inclusive rate is not to exceed 5.5%. And secondly, approve the refinancing of $17,198,315 with a 10-year amortization term and financing over 10 years with an all-inclusive rate not to exceed 5.5%.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Cuddle, second. Any further questions? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The motion's carried. Thank you. Now moving on to capital approvals. 5.1, capital expenditures for the 11 months ended February 28th, 2022.
Again, I'll lead the discussion on this one. What we do at every meeting is we give you an update in terms of what our spend has been on our capital budget. We highlight sort of the total amount of funding that's available. We highlight our expenditures to date. And then we highlight sort of the remaining money available. So as we've been talking about throughout the year, and Reid has described some of the challenges we've been facing over the entire fiscal year, we're seeing exactly that pattern continue. We have approximately $262 million available in funding at the beginning of the fiscal year. To date, we've spent a total of $74.2 million, which leaves a remaining budget at the end of February of about $187 million. So that gives you the snapshot in terms of what we have in total funding available for the current fiscal year. The numbers are continuing to be high, and as we progress through some of the capital challenges we've been facing and increasing the capacity in the organization to deliver capital, the expectation is those numbers will improve. The other item that we added to the report that we've put before you is some information on the number of projects that are currently active. What we've seen is that the number of projects in total that are active has increased. So what that says is that we do have a lot of projects available and open in terms of what we can do in terms of our delivery. We are putting attention to them and are actively starting them and managing them through the process. So the number of projects that we're moving continues to increase. We have a lot more activity on the projects that are available to us. So we've tried to identify that in the report this time. There is another item that we flagged through the report, and what we've been doing to help manage our capital budget is if we did have funds approved in previous years where the projects have been closed or canceled or ended with budget available, we've been using that money to supplement some of the other projects as required. So what we've done, we've used about $9.7 million of that funding to offset budget increases in other projects or to enhance other projects that we've been doing. And what that does is, in the past, we would have essentially taken that money from active current year projects. So that would have reduced our ability to do current year projects. So what we've done by using the other money is we're able to maintain our current year's projects, but then we've been able to supplement and increase what we could do in some of the other projects. So we do have a considerable amount of money available. We have been fairly strategic in how we fund overages or add projects by using the available funds from previous years. And we have more activity in sort of a broader range of projects than we would have in last fiscal year. And I don't know if Reid or Kathy wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it, Louis, from my perspective. I'll just say going into the current year, we talked in the in-camera portion about market challenges, and our large projects, we're just going to have to evaluate on a one-by-one basis and determine whether it's the right strategies to proceed or to move it into next year or a future year and take another tendering approach or hope that market conditions improve.
Okay, any questions? Okay, Commissioner Dago-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Louis, on the underspent, deferred, or canceled projects, are any of them, was it natural attrition kinds of reasons, or would any of those had a negative impact on our customers, consumers?
Certainly from the financial perspective, we rely on the engineering department to determine which projects have been finished, which projects need to go ahead, or which projects can be deferred or canceled. So we rely on the engineering group to communicate that. So Reed may be able to speak to that.
I was just going to say, does that mean over to Reed?
It sort of means I'm chucking the ball over the fence to Reed, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why projects fall into those categories. I think, the good news is sometimes we budget, let's say $10 million for a project and we get attractive tendering prices and it comes in at 8 million, and that's why we have underspending. There's a few of those every year. There are also some projects that go into the capital budget at the planning stage, and when we get working on what the need is, sometimes they get rolled into another project. Sometimes we decide the project is not necessary. So those would be examples of canceled projects. Deferred projects are ones, largely we don't deliver when we planned. And I think through the year I've talked to you about, we've got some, this year in particular, some significant projects. There's a couple I'm thinking of where we're working on land issues. They're deferred. Are our customers, suffering something at the moment? Not directly, but the one I'm thinking of is, the Fairview Cove sewer tunnel. It relates to combined sewer overflows, and that's something we would want to get a handle on and do just as soon as we can, but we have to deal with the land issues before we can move forward with it. So that's an example of a deferred project. So they'd be the ones I'd be most concerned about.
So just as a follow-up question, my concern might be if the money was spent elsewhere, but it was a planned project, now we have to go find the funding again? Or, so I'm just worried about, because we're using that funding to help supplement, then is it lost? Do we have to go find money again?
I think Kathy wants to add something to an answer here.
Yeah, so we have to go through a process annually to basically reconcile the capital projects and report on, as of March 31st, our fiscal year end, what's completed, what's under budget, what's over budget, what's canceled, what's deferred. That information gets filed to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board in September 30th of each year. The URB has an opportunity, and it comes to the Halifax Water Board as a report at the September board meeting. So the Halifax Water Board and the URB have the opportunity to ask questions if they have any concerns about the impact a particular deferral or cancellation might have. If it's a project that's been deferred from a current fiscal year's budget, for instance, because we know we're not going to be able to secure the necessary land, for example, that might be a common reason. Then, and it's still a project that's required that we do in our business plan and in our integrated resource plan, that it will come back in a future year's capital budget. But for those kinds of changes, there are pluses and minuses every year in the capital budget. So that's why the annual reporting to the URB is required, that kind of monitors that annual plus minus to the capital funding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Zakov.
I think my question is more to Reed. I'm concerned with the CapEx under delivery, as we discussed it on the previous board meeting, that Halifax Water works to catch up with the IRP plan to spend 135 million per year, and it's still work in progress. given the market fluctuations that we've seen on some other projects that we discussed, what are the risks that this capex that is being accumulated for deferred or delayed projects will actually be consumed by those, market fluctuations, and then Halifax Water will end up in the situation on under delivery? It will be technically, but potentially there is a risk of overspend on currently approved budgets projects, and then the Halifax Water won't have enough funds to cover for others.
Yep. That's a good question, Commissioner. And that's one that I've been talking to the board with on since I moved into this role just about a year ago. And you and Councillor Kolomeitsev wouldn't have had the advantage of, there's a workshop we did with the board in December where I made a lengthy presentation on what we're doing about that. So, I'm concerned about it as well, and it's a very good question. And our current staffing and business processes that we have and the way the engineering department is organized was created around 2010. And at the time, our capital budget was around $30 million. We've been spending the last, if you take all the years from which the money's spent, over the last 5-7 years, we've been spending $50 to $70 million a year. So, considering, without changing the level of staffing, without changing the business processes, without some systems to track and manage the flow of capital projects. So, and that's part of our operating budget this year. So we are bringing on 11 people in the engineering department this year. I think the reality is we've not dealt with that growth and capital requirement as we should have in terms of how we deliver in business processes. So we're bringing on the 11 people. We are going to bring in a system to provide a different level of governance of capital projects. That's something that's consistent in private industry and larger utilities. And we're just nearing the end of a procurement stage on a capital project management information system that will help us manage the flow of capital projects. So, for instance, one thing is our engineering department is organized according to the 3 capital budgets we have, which probably made a lot of sense when we were doing $30 million 12 years ago. With the amount of work going on in the city, and so we've got small groups of people managing the entire span of the capital project cycle, but also repeating work, 3 people going to a meeting with HRM instead of 1, that type of thing. And so that's the type of thing in the coming weeks or months that we're going to be implementing some measures to correct that. So I hope to get that's my main goal from Kathy, is to figure out today we're not capable of spending $130 million a year, but we absolutely have to get there.
I have a follow-up question, Reid, if you don't mind. Perhaps the IRP require an update or revision if the case that Halifax Water won't be able to catch up with the plan in the next few years, or the plan is still to try to catch up with what the IRP has in plan.
Yeah, and you're right. And in fact, we reduced the capital budget this year to $106 million, just to give us a better chance to get things in place and deliver on it. So you raise a good point. And so the result of that is, in the 5-year capital budget that we submit to the URB, that has the obvious effect. It's just pushing money into years, mostly into years 3 and 4 of the 5-year capital budget that goes with it. And so we have a couple of years in it that are $200 million. And, right now, I'm not, I'll be happy if we get to 130, 150 million in a couple of years. But however, this fall, we're starting our formal 5-year business planning process with we submit a new 5-year business plan to the URB. I believe that's next year, Kathy, but we're going to start that in the fall. And that's the place where we're going to have to look at that. And we're also starting our next IRP. And I think you also raise a good point. We need to look at things like these sewer separation projects and what is the true cost of them given the busyness in the city and the market conditions. So that all needs to be evaluated as well going forward. So your point is bang on, and that's part of what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Oh, I've lost you guys. Where are you on my screen? I don't know if there are any more speakers. I can't see it here.
There are
Yeah.
no.
May I
Okay.
just add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Louis. I think that was you, Louis. I can't see
Yes, it
any.
was. Sorry. I was sending the international signal. What I was wanted to do is there was in the report and table that's there. There will be an update. We have updated the forecast numbers. So right now the report says there'll be $125 million spent by the end of the year. That number's actually closer to about 95 million. So we'll update that number in the report and we'll reissue it. So you'll see that coming forward.
Thank you. Mimi, did you want to ask a question? I just see your, oh, she's having connectivity issues. We still have quorum, so we'll just carry on here. All right. There was no motions involved in that, so we'll move now on to 5.2, the Cogswell District Energy System Utility Formation plus initial capital approval.
Thank you. We have a presentation to go through for this one, which we'll try to go through quickly. And I'll tag team it with Jeff Knapp, who is also on the line and is our project manager and who has been the, one of the employees who's been closest to this project since the very beginning back in 2017. Next slide, Jake. So this slide is just a refresher on the authority that Halifax Water has under the HRWC Act with respect to district energy. There were amendments made several years ago that enabled Halifax Water to get involved with other business activities. And that would be clause C, subject to the approval and direction of council, engage in business activities incidental to any of the operations of the commission referred to in clause A or B. Essentially, heat or electricity in whole or in part from the byproducts of any of our operations with respect to water, wastewater, storm water service delivery. And after these act amendments were done, there was actually a administrative order passed by the municipality regarding Halifax Water that also provides further clarification. Next slide. So the amendments I just referred to were initiated back in 2012. Halifax Water initiated a request to council. Council approved them. Then the request went to the province and the province amended the HRWC Act. In 2016, there was a feasibility study completed for district energy by DEC Engineering for Halifax Water. It showed a positive business case, which has subsequently improved in the intervening years. And one of the key things at that point in time was that in establishing this new utility service, a risk was identified in terms of whether or not buildings would connect. So one of the prerequisites to Halifax Water proceeding with developing district energy was identified as having the municipality create a mandatory connection bylaw. That's what has enabled district energy to successfully be implemented in many other municipal jurisdictions. So that was one of the conditions and it has been met. Ambient temperature district energy was shown to be the most promising and cost-effective and efficient system for the Cogswell redevelopment area. Jeff Knapp is going to explain to you in a couple of slides what ambient temperature district energy is. And this project does align with our core values, environmental stewardship. HRM had a community energy plan at the time, which has been replaced with the much broader and more comprehensive Halifax 2050. And also this project aligns with municipal, provincial, federal clean energy and environmental objectives and benefits our customer base, most importantly. Next slide, Jake. And I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Knapp here to walk you through how the district energy system will actually work.
Thanks, Kathy. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So there's quite a bit more information in the board report today under the proof of concept section on how the system is intended to work. You know, some of the nuances around high temperature versus ambient temperature systems. But suffice it to say, the ambient temperature system that we have chosen for this district energy system it should be much more efficient, energy efficient than say a high temperature system, and also more cost effective. High temperature systems, you know, which there's quite a few of those around the world in service today, they operate based on having a centralized energy center, which typically is very large and uses some form, usually of fossil fuel such as oil, natural gas. There's also biomass systems. And they operate at temperatures that are fairly high in the 70 to 90 degrees Celsius range, and are you know, fairly costly to implement and do require fossil fuels to operate and emit significant greenhouse gas emissions. Ambient temperature systems are usually based on waste heat recovery, and that's what we're talking about here. Recovering waste heat from the Halifax Wastewater Treatment Facility to provide heating and cooling services to the 6 buildings that are forecast to be constructed inside the Cogswell redevelopment area. You can see those in this layout that's before you here, I think is probably the most recent layout that's come from HRM. And you can see the 6 buildings in yellow, marked A, B, C, D, and E, and J. And those are the buildings that are currently planned for construction within the Cogswell redevelopment area. The diagram shows the energy center and the wastewater treatment facility over on the right, next to the large traffic circle, which is located near the D&D properties. And the piping will come from that energy center and run down the newly realigned Barrington Street, and then move off into each building with interconnections. And there's also a connection which will run up Cogswell Street to the corner of Cogswell and Brunswick Street. And the reason that was put in was because you know, we are daylighting that street during the Cogswell realignment and Cogswell reconstruction. So we thought if there's ever to be an interest in connecting to an area outside of the mandatory connection zone, that would be a good place to do it, and we would put that pipe in while that street is daylighted. So that's a quick overview of the district energy system and the layout of the piping systems and the buildings. Next slide. This is a very simple sketch or schematic of how the system will operate. You can see the wastewater treatment facility on the left and the warm effluent discharge to the harbor. The district energy center, the energy center will take effluent from that channel from the wastewater treatment facility and run it through pumps and heat exchangers and then back into the effluent discharge, which will then go to the harbor as normal. It won't take all of that flow, but it will at times take a significant portion of that flow. On the other side of the heat exchangers, you have the district energy piping loop, or the piping distribution piping system. It's a 2-pipe system, so you have one supply and one return. They will pick up energy or dump energy in those energy center heat exchangers, which then can be distributed to the buildings to be used in their heating systems. And inside of each of those buildings, you would have an energy transfer station, which would consist of a heat exchanger, some valving, some piping, an energy meter, that sort of thing, which will then allow that heat to be either pushed into the building or heat to be removed from the building during cooling season. Examples of the heat exchanger you might see in those buildings is shown at that photo on the bottom. That's an example of one of the heat exchangers from the Marine Gateway District Energy System in Vancouver. The rest of the systems are expected to be owned and operated by the building owners, and they would typically be putting in a heat pump, a large industrial style heat pump, to provide heating and cooling to their buildings. And an example of one of those is shown in the top photo. That's one of the heat pumps at Marine Gateway. So that's a very quick and simple overview of how the system would work. Again, there's more information, more detailed information in the proof of concept document in your board package. Next slide, please. We have continued to evaluate the business case for the utility. As you know, we have applied for and received approval for funding from the Infrastructure Canada, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. Even before that funding, the business case was positive for this utility. But that funding certainly helps us a lot in making the business case even more positive. So we have factored those numbers into the financial analysis. Right now, you see before you some example rates that we might charge for heating energy and cooling energy and the demand, and compared to what the comparable energy source would be for a conventional system. So for instance, to try and achieve a 9% internal rate of return, the energy rates we would have to charge for heating compared to natural gas would be about 4 cents, a little over 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Currently, natural gas prices are around the 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour for heating energy. For cooling, similarly, it'd be about 9 cents. In that case, you're looking at what the comparable electricity rates are. So again, very favorable, and it would have a comparative demand charge associated with it as on a dollar per kilowatt level. Again, compared to electricity, would be fairly favorable. The financials on the analysis are positive, and the analysis period on this is over 40 years. The net present value is a little over $66 million, a 9% rate of return, simple payback of about 12 years, and significant GHG reductions versus baseline over the life of the expected life of the utility. The period we've chosen for that analysis, which I believe was 40 years as well, over 470,000 tons of CO2 equivalent in savings. Next slide, please.
So this is where I'll jump back in. And we just wanted to highlight, particularly for some of our newer commissioners, a little bit of the reasons why we get into this and the conclusions why it's the right thing to do. So there is a positive business case, as Jeff has explained. The project demonstrates environmental leadership and it aligns with the municipality's objectives for Halifax 2050. The ambient temperature DES is a demonstrated and a reliable solution, so we're not being bleeding edge. We also have sufficient thermal energy to meet the heating and cooling requirements of the proposed DES loads, in addition to potential extra capacity for future customers. We can offer the customer thermal energy cost effectively and with rate stability, as Jeff showed you on the previous slide, compared to conventional natural gas, electricity, or heating oil systems. And I should mention that the numbers we used and showed in that illustration on the last slide were only for illustrative purposes, because of course we will not know what the actual rates will be for this service until capital construction is complete and we go through a process with the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board to establish rates and regulations. We also don't know what natural gas, electricity, or heating oil will be priced at in future, but it's safe to say that there will still be a cost differential and this will still be competitive. Next slide. Halifax Water ownership advantages were something we looked at early on. We did consider, maybe we would just sell the waste heat to someone else and have somebody else do DES, or the municipality could have done DES. But it made sense for Halifax Water to own it and operate it because we have the existing operating expertise. We're currently a regulated utility, and we're used to dealing with piped services. DES is just another piped service from our perspective. We do have existing billing and customer service systems, so that is an efficient factor. We also have a low cost of financing, and we are a secure public utility. So Halifax did apply to the URB, and the URB had ruled that a DES could and should be operated as a regulated public utility under the Public Utilities Act. And the municipality helped us mitigate risk by implementing the mandatory connection bylaw to the system within the Halifax Cogswell redevelopment area. Next slide. So the next steps, this is a slide that we have been using since 2017 to lay out the methodical process we have to undertake to set up the district energy system. So you can see we've inserted complete by the steps that have been done, and we're giving you an idea of where we're at now and what's next. So subject to the approval of the board today, we will be making a submission to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board for their approval. We would anticipate this submission will be made sometime between May 11th and May 31st. And then we will go through the URB hearing process. At the same time, we'll be looking at our next phase of the detailed design for the linear infrastructure, the energy center, the building energy transfer stations, the building design specifications, and updating the business case. So we're also actively working with the municipality on the Cogswell redevelopment project. You would have seen in your report a picture of the piping that is actually here now, and the municipality is installing it in conjunction with the Cogswell redevelopment as it proceeds. So the district piping system construction began, distribution system piping construction began in January 2022. So our next step, once we get the URB approval and once the construction of the piping system is complete and we have the detailed design of the energy center and the energy transfer stations, will be to establish the next application to the URB for cost of service studies, establishing regulations, and ultimately rates. And we would need to have everything wrapped up, I would say, at least 6 months before we would see the first buildings connected and customers for us to serve. Next slide. I think that's it. So we're open to questions.
All right, I have a little bit of a speakers list. I have Commissioner Cuttle, then Commissioner Rawlings, and then Commissioner Zakharov. I think I keep adding a K in there. Sorry, Kostya. Commissioner Cuttle.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this project. I think it's great. You know, it's great overall for Halifax, and I think it's particularly great for Halifax Water here. I've got a bunch of questions, but let me see where to start. I've been jotting them down as we've been going. One was about the Cogswell extension. I mean, you've mentioned that you have capacity to service the energy district, which has a defined boundary, and then you've extended the pipe up Cogswell to where it's been extended. It's mostly new construction, except for the trade center or trademark building, right? So I'm wondering about one, like the ability for customers to retrofit to district energy. But if you just go up to the next block, you have the Halifax Police Station, up to Gottingen, you have Halifax Police Station, the Staples Building, which is scheduled for redevelopment, construction happening on the other corner, and then you have the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center site of the Blue Cross building there by the Centennial Pool. So I'm wondering about the opportunity to extend it further to where there's new construction, and how, in support of getting people to connect, how I'm just wondering if anyone's working with developers for installing these systems, because it looks like you need different infrastructure, internal like systems, heating systems, than would be standard practice today to connect into the system. And I'm just wondering how all that works, and if there's that kind of thinking of looking at where new development is happening. I think even the police station is going to be redeveloped soon. So that was one question. The other was about the mandatory hookup and how that works, and how you can, get people to hook up, how it's mandatory. A little bit of information on how that, on how, yeah, how you do that. And yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
So I'll start and then maybe Jeff can jump in. The first one with respect to information for prospective developers, we do have a developer information package that's been developed, and frankly, you know, we'll be constantly updating the information available on our website now and communications approach once we get the Halifax Board approval today and make the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board application. Secondly, with respect to mandatory connection and how that happens, it's a municipal bylaw because Halifax Water does not have the authority to impose mandatory connections. And as buildings are developed and within that boundary, that would be one of the conditions in terms of the approval. With respect to the future capacity and potential customers, I'm going to hand that over to Jeff.
Yeah, so connecting to other customers outside of the Cogswell boundary or the current Cogswell boundary is certainly possible, and we anticipate that there would be some interest in the future, but we haven't really had any serious discussions with anyone yet about, you know, connecting to anything outside of the district energy system. But as I mentioned earlier, because we have that section of Cogswell daylighted, it made sense to put that piping in the ground at this point in time, so we don't have to, you know, reinstate things later on, or reconstruct and reinstate things later on. You know, there is excess capacity available based on our modeling so far, from what we have forecasted to build in the Cogswell area. So there is excess capacity there. And it can be connected to somebody outside of the system. As far as connecting it to buildings with existing heating systems, that gets more challenging because the buildings were designed based on typically high temperature systems. So if they're using, let's say, a hydronic heating system that uses oil, they're typically running at a temperature that's up around 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Ambient temperature systems and heat pump systems that are water-based run at temperatures that are probably down around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so they don't quite fit with the old technology. So retrofitting an older building to work with a newer heating system like this, or like what would be used in an ambient temperature system, it gets fairly expensive and difficult to do. It's not impossible, but you get into the economics of it that may or may not make sense depending on the situation. Whereas if you have a new construction building, that's a lot easier to do. It's probably comparable in cost to conventional heating systems, and you know, can certainly be built with net zero in mind, for instance, and connecting to the DES would certainly help in that regard. So it's possible it's very doable for new construction. Still doable for old construction, but a lot more expensive, and there'd be challenges with that.
Right, which is like to my point where the extension's going, we've kind of missed the boat on the opportunity there. And how does a utility then, in terms of sales and getting people on board, like what is the capacity internally for doing that? I do know the Staples property is owned by Southwest Properties, and that they have a large development there. So I'm, you know, wondering like how proactive is Halifax Water in reaching out to future potential customers in terms of getting them hooked in now to the district energy program before they reach a planning stage in their development that makes it, you know, not viable.
Yeah, so I can answer that. That certainly hasn't happened yet because we don't have a utility yet to be able to go out to customers and say, you know, we're ready for you to connect. But you know, when we do become a utility, I would think at some point, if there is significant interest, the piping system for the DES could be extended further if necessary. But you know, you'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis as to the costs and feasibility of connecting into whatever building they're looking at developing. So it's certainly a whole thing. It's certainly possible, but we haven't been looking at it or chasing those opportunities at this point.
Okay, another exciting one is CMHC just approved a big co-op development on Maitland, right behind the district there. That'd be another good one to look at.
I'm going to interrupt you there for right there. I think Kathy wanted to, Kathy wanted to offer a comment on that, and then we'll move on. Would you like me? I'll put you on the speakers list again. Thank you. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm okay. I was just going to say exactly what Jeff had with respect to we can't actually market until we have a utility approved.
Okay, Commissioner Rawlings.
Thank you, Jeff. Love the detail of this presentation and the fact it's moving forward. You had a comment on the, I think it's the savings and the carbon avoidance. Does the business plan include the opportunity for, you know, sale of carbon credits, or is this really the end users will avoid requiring carbon credits?
So I can answer that. It currently does not include the financial side of carbon credits and any benefits we may get from that. I think those details are still fairly uncertain here in Nova Scotia. So right now, all it's been included there is information on the savings that we would expect to see from these buildings versus a conventional or you know, business as usual type of heating systems using either electricity or natural gas. Okay. But so those are the savings that we would expect to see. Yeah.
And any anticipated change to the wastewater treatment plant due to this addition? Like, and it could be cost additions or savings or an impact of plant maintenance based on sort of carving off the residual heat?
Not really, because the system is planned to be connected at the very end of the treatment process in the effluent stream. It would simply be drawing effluent water off of that small effluent channel at the end of the building, and then re-injecting it a little further down the line. So we don't expect it to have any impact on operational performance of the treatment system. And I think we have looked at the numbers, even if we were to consider in the future, you know, more heat recovery at the plant to try and offset even more of the heating costs there. It's such a small amount that it would have no impact on this system.
And last question, any comment on the local engineering expertise on for the downstream developers as they design their buildings?
I think the local expertise in some ways is certainly local here. There's lots of engineering companies local that have this expertise. The types of systems we're talking about are heat pump systems, very common today. And certainly too, you know, the types of engineering firms that the developers would be using to build these buildings would certainly be very familiar with this technology, and certainly with more and more with net zero construction, for instance. So I think, you know, that expertise is there. Some of it in terms of large building development may not be as much local, but that would depend on the engineering firm. They may draw resources from other areas of the country that are more used to larger building development than some of the local firms. But I think a lot of that expertise is local. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I have Commissioner Zaharov next. I'm just going to pass the chair over to Commissioner Collings for a minute. I just need to tend to something here, and I'll be back shortly. And just something to think about before we move on with 6 and 7. We're considering deferring, so I'll just put that as a parking lot issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a few questions, probably mostly related to not having all the background on the project. So from utility perspective setup, I saw there is some investment requirement to set up the utility. So this utility is actually meaning the Halifax Water. It's not going to be a separate organization, right?
Do you want me to take that, Kathy? Or yeah, it's intended to be a utility under the Halifax Water umbrella. So yes, it would be a single utility with Halifax Water operated inside of Halifax Water. Yes.
And the plan, so as it will be an integral part of the Halifax Water, I suspect the plan would be staffing with the HR with Halifax Water staff, right? So I'm just basically, I guess I'm asking if Halifax Water is set up resource-wise to set up the new line of business, because it sounds like there are some challenges to execute on the CapEx work. And now we're adding like a new, almost an additional department or an additional line of business. So is there any challenges anticipated with hiring sufficient people to maintain it, or the current roster should be sufficient?
No, we think it's very doable under the current structure. First of all, the capital cost of it, and the construction of the various components. It's not a huge spend. It's not a huge capital project. The distribution piping system is currently under construction, and that is being built as part of the Cogswell redevelopment project by HRM and their contractor Dexter. So Halifax Water has minimal involvement in that construction, but we are monitoring it from a quality perspective and technical perspective. The energy center we foresee that being a fairly small building, so not a large capital cost and not a big construction project. So not too big of a deal as far as resources are concerned. And then beyond that, as each building is built, there's a small energy transfer station in each building, which is really, very low value, very low complexity as each building gets built out. So again, you might see 1 or 2 buildings built in a given year. So not a big draw on resources for that either. So we don't see that being an issue going forward.
Okay, thanks. Being cautious of time, I'll ask one more, and I guess I can maybe reach out separately with a few more questions. Business case looks brilliant all around, and Halifax Water even gets funding for it, which makes the business case even more attractive. I haven't seen any comments on any potential drawbacks or risks to this solution. So there are any drawbacks to implementing this system, Halifax Water-wise or residents-wise? Because I'm a bit surprised to see only everything is so positive. Is there any risks or drawbacks at all to this implementation?
Yeah, there are a few risks which we have certainly identified in our risk analysis. Was that included in the board report?
No.
No, I don't think that was in this one, Jeff. I think that our intention was when we get the final business case and come to get approval to do the cost of service and the rate application, that it would come forward then.
Yeah. So there are a number of risks, but they're all fairly what I would call low risks and easily manageable. So the analysis has been completed. Financial was one of the biggest ones before we had funding, but that has since been mitigated to a certain extent. Yeah, so there are some risks involved, but nothing that we see as being unmanageable.
Okay, I'm happy to defer it because it sounds like I'm a little bit putting the cart before the horse. So, okay, thanks.
Commissioner Daigle-Gaiman?
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. So actually, Kostya, I build on yours because one of my questions was a little bit about risk and about the setup of the utility. So just on the financials, I would imagine then that there would be a separate category of financials that would just be around the DES, so that it would be clear to see the result of the positive business case as you go forward. So that would be one thing. The other thing I was wondering about was the warm effluent flowing into Halifax Harbor and the environmental concern that may or may not be as a result from the warm effluent. There's a lot of conversations happening right now around effluent being pumped into the lakes in the harbor. So would that be something, Jeffrey, that would have been in that risk analysis?
I believe it's, there's certainly environmental risks that we've flagged, not necessarily specifically to the warm effluent going into the harbor, but that effluent is and has been flowing into the harbor, since Halifax has been here. to some extent. And certainly, you know, there's warm effluent flowing from that treatment facility into the harbor. I think it has been studied as part of the development of the Harbor Solutions projects and is not seen as being a risk to the receiving water because of the volumes of water that get exchanged there in the harbor every day, and also the temperature of the water. It's not overly, you know, hot, shall we say, to a point to do damage to any of the environment where it's flowing into. And you have the same situation in all of our treatment plants that flow into the harbor. Yeah.
I thought that some of them have a volume capacity. So is the harbor different because of the flow of the water?
I don't think so. It's such a small amount of water flowing into the harbor each day.
Okay. Okay.
And also compared to how much gets flushed in and out with the tides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. So Madam Vice Chair, if and when you need the motion to be put on the floor, I could do that.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Commissioner Kolomitsev?
I just had a question that might tie into risk, and that was, do you foresee any opposition from competition in any energy providers?
I'll answer that one. And I've just got another thing I want to add on risk too. When we did the application to establish the ruling of whether this should be a regulated or unregulated service, we did see Nova Scotia Power and Heritage Gas intervene in that process. We did get the URB approval, though, that we could proceed with our regulated utility. It's uncertain whether they will intervene in this application. It is, you know, a very positive new development for the community in terms of the environmental benefit, and it's got very low risk, and to some extent, you know, it's not going to do a lot to harm the business case or the model for natural gas or electricity. We may see some interest in our application, however, but one of the things we're going to do is, after the board approves this today, if the board approves it, we are going to start a bit of stakeholder engagement with Nova Scotia Power and Heritage Gas. So hopefully we can have some support and not opposition when we go to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And also on the matter of risk, on page 4 of the report, there is a note that one of the risks to the project, which we haven't talked about today, is the size and composition of the buildings. So our business model is based on the current plan for the Cogswell redevelopment that council has approved. If there is anything that changes with that in terms of the number of buildings, the size of the buildings, or the composition of the buildings and how they're used, then it could impact our business case.
Any follow-up questions, Commissioner Kolomitsev?
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome back, Madam Chair. We're at one follow-up question.
Nope, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. One follow-up question for Commissioner Cuddle, and then Commissioner Deagle-Gammon has offered to make the motion.
Terrific, thank you. Commissioner Cuddle.
No, I didn't have a follow-up question. Actually, Mimi asked it around the competition with other utilities. I'm good, thank you.
Commissioner Deagle-Gammon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make the motion that Halifax Water Board approve, 1, the execution of a cost-sharing agreement with the Halifax Regional Municipality for construction of the Cogswell District Energy System distribution piping system, wherein 1,302,780 is the net Halifax Water share of the overall 3,809,199 construction costs of the Cogswell DES distribution piping system. 2, capital funding in the amount of 900,000 for the detailed design of the DES Energy Center. 3, capital funding in the amount of 500,000 for the development of the regulated DES, including development of the cost of service model, rate studies, operating procedures, business processes, and regulations. And 4, application to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board for approval of the capital expenditure and establishment of the regulated DES service within Halifax Water based on the established business case. So moved.
Who is the second on that?
That's
Commissioner Cuttle. Thank you. Seconds. Any further questions? Oh, okay. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. Thank you very much. We are moving now on to 5.3, application for funding for Halifax Water Projects, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Green Environmental Quality Stream.
So Halifax Council approved submission of these applications on Tuesday at Council. This report is here because we also need a motion from the Halifax Water Board before we can proceed with the applications.
Okay, so we'll need a motion on that one for discussion.
Sorry, I had a question on 5.2, please.
Thank you. Commissioner, go ahead.
I'm looking at the board package, page 2, and it says here that the 2 projects will be presented to Halifax Regional Council on March 22nd, which was 2 days ago. So was this presented to council before for the endorsement before they went to the board approval, or what's the procedure, please?
So they were presented to council before they had the Halifax Water Board approval. There's no defined procedure for this other than we would never be able to make a funding application without having all of the necessary approvals in place. Sometimes some programs don't require a council approval and Halifax Water can apply directly. With respect to this program, there was a tight timeline for us to make the application. And because the Halifax Water Board did not meet again until June, we had to get our necessary approvals in place in March. So that meant for the municipality, they could get it to the March 22nd meeting. We could get it to the March 24th meeting.
Okay, so it was the timeline constraints. Thank you.
Yes.
And Commissioner, nope, see that. I don't see any further questions. Anyone?
I should also mention to Commissioner Zaharov that these projects are part of the integrated resource plan and the business plans that were already approved by the Halifax Water Board. So to some extent, us coming to seek approval to go look for external funding is almost a housekeeping amendment.
Okay, thank you.
I'll need a motion on that, folks.
Commissioner Rawlings can do, oh, Commissioner Kalamita.
Sure.
Kalamita?
I move that the Halifax Water Board authorize staff to apply for funding from the Green Environmental Quality Stream of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program in the current call for nominations set to close on April 1st, 2022 for the following projects: Sawmill River Daylighting and Renewal Phase 2 and Lake Major Pumping Station Renewal and New Intake.
The seconder?
Second.
Commissioner Zaharov, second. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. So now we'll be looking for agreement on, just given the time, deferring the number 6 corporate balance scorecard and the diversity, equity, inclusion policy. Do we need a motion for that, Heidi, or we just have consensus to defer those?
Sorry, I was looking for the mute button. A motion.
Okay, someone like, unless there is any concern with that, can perhaps someone move that we defer those for the next meeting?
I can move that. I move that we defer item number 6, the corporate balance scorecard 22-23 program, and item 7, diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, until the next meeting of the Halifax Water Board.
Seconder, do we have?
Second. I'll
Thank
second.
you, Costa. There's a mover and a seconder. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, moving forward now with number 8, group extended health plan enhancement. Do we have a presentation on this or just some comments?
There is no presentation. However, our Manager of Human Resources, Rochelle Belmare, is here to answer any questions you might have. And this recommendation is coming forward from our Pension and Benefits Committee as a result of a benchmarking review we did to look at how our plan compared to other employers' group insurance plans.
Thank you. Any questions on this? Any comments? I'd just like to add, while I can, I think this is a great step. To me, it's I'm absolutely supportive of this, particularly these days. And we need to, our employees work hard and life can be hard. And so I think this is a great added benefit. So I'm all in favor of it. And seeing no other comments, let's just go to we need a motion on the floor. We want to put that on?
Commissioner Palomita, I can do that.
Yes,
Madam
please.
Chair, I have a question.
Who is that? Who was the question from? Oh,
I do, Commissioner Daigle Gammon, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
thank you.
I
Okay.
wasn't quick enough getting the question in the chat. I apologize. An excellent addition to the health plan. I have a question about any implication to the collective agreements that are in place at Halifax Water.
No, there's no implications to collective agreements. The collective agreements, we have the Pension and Benefit Committee, which is representation of union. There's union representation there, and of course, this has been raised there, and a motion was put forth to move it, and all 3 employee groups have approved this to move forward.
I think it's great. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Palomita, you have the floor.
I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the following enhancement to the plan on the next renewal period effective June 1st, 2022, to add a mental health benefit which includes an overall combined practitioner maximum of $1,500 for psychologists, social workers, psychotherapists, and counseling therapists.
Okay, we have a seconder.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Cuddle, thank you. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
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 And those opposed, nay.
Aye.
The motion is carried. Number 9, our final item is dispute resolution officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's an item that I'll address. The report is in the package. It's a relatively brief report. It's simply there to advise the board that we have selected a new dispute resolution officer. Unless you have any questions, I'll leave the report to stand on its own.
See none in the chat. No one's frantically waving their hands. Would someone, do you need a motion for that? Sorry, go ahead,
I
Kostya.
have a question. Maybe it's related to the overall setup that just still need to get some background. I think the dispute resolution officer is the independent body. Is that right? He's independent of Halifax Water?
That's correct.
And I think the report here says that Halifax Water will be paying his compensation or something like that. So I'm just trying to understand how the officer is independent of Halifax Water if Halifax Water actually pays his salary.
So he is independent from Halifax Water in that we don't, it's not an employee-employer relationship or a contractor relationship. Of course, he is engaged by Halifax Water, but we don't monitor, him on a day-to-day basis. He operates very independently. He has his own office space, you know, all of those details. He's not managed by our human resources. He's not within the Halifax Water pension. He's not within the Halifax Water employee benefits plan. So there's no overlap there. He is paid by Halifax Water, as you've noted. That is a relatively standard approach for these type of ombuds type of people or positions, both with Nova Scotia Power and then also municipally and provincially. So there are budgetary pieces that come out of our budget in order to fund this particular function, but outside of that, there's you know, outside of our payment to the dispute resolution officer, there's no real other connection.
But if he is not getting paid by Halifax Water, he is terminated technically from his position, right?
Sorry.
Is my audio breaking up?
Yeah.
It is hard to hear. It kind of goes quiet and yeah. So just if you could repeat your question.
I apologize. No, I'm just a follow-up question. So if he's not getting paid by Halifax Water, he's effectively terminated, and he cannot review any disputes, right?
Yeah, so we have a contract. The contract is for a 5-year period, as is noted in the report. In order for him to be terminated, that requires approval by the Utility and Review Board. So if he was to be terminated early before the end of that term, that 5-year term, we would have to go to the Utility and Review Board to get their approval to do so. So we couldn't just stop paying him. We would have to go to the Utility and Review Board first.
So now, okay, I'm just trying to understand the level of independency that he has actually. Thank you for clarification.
Yeah, it is a significant level of independence in the sense that he's not influenced by staff. He's not bound by Halifax Water policies or procedures. You know, obviously we encourage him to operate in a safe manner and comply with our safety standards. But outside of that, he operates very independently. You know, in the event, if there were ever a situation where we were going to the Utility and Review Board for termination, it would be a very severe situation. I would suggest it would be something was really going very wrong and it required us to intervene. And we don't anticipate that to be happen, but it's a good parachute pull cord to have in the event that something does happen.
Understood. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Can you give us some examples of how or what scenario would be the case that he would, if anything would come before him? You know, we have customers who are disgruntled and concerned and will, you know, use a number of means to get their issues raised. But at what point would it move to his adjudication? And the second question is, looking in the discussion piece in the report, since 2017, over 240 complaints were resolved. That's over what, 4 years, 5 years now. How does that stack up to be? Is that a lot? Is that kind of consistent with other terms in the past? Where do we sit on that? Because I know the AMI meters, for instance, were highly contentious and continue to be. Of course, consumption is changing and rates are changing. So just, yeah, if you could just comment on that a bit. Thank you.
Sure.
So
Perhaps Heidi could start and I'll jump in with the comparison piece, Heidi.
Sure, sounds good. So I'll address first your question about the process, about how a customer would ultimately get to the dispute resolution officer. So we do have an internal complaint resolution process as well, and we do require customers to go through that process to completion before they contact the dispute resolution officer. And that's one of the steps that we've asked the dispute resolution officer to confirm when they open a file, is that the process has completed itself within Halifax Water. So the customer has exhausted that avenue and now still feels as though they didn't get the answer that they wanted, and therefore they want to go to the next level. The types of complaints that go to the dispute resolution officer can vary, but in all honesty, the majority of the complaints that the dispute resolution officer manages relate to stormwater, which should not come as any great surprise. To your point, there were an influx of complaints surrounding the AMI meters when that program was initially implemented. What we've seen is those complaints have started to decrease quite a bit. And I know Kathy mentioned that she wanted to talk a little bit about trends, so I'll stop there. I'm starting to bleed into your thunder there, Kathy.
I just wanted to answer the question about comparability, because when the dispute resolution process was initially set up, it was something that the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board asked us to consider shortly after we started stormwater as a regulated service with separate rates. And the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board was familiar with the dispute resolution process because Nova Scotia Power has a dispute resolution officer. When we looked across the country, you know, there's no other regulated water, wastewater, and stormwater utility. And there's no, for example, DRO from another jurisdiction dealing with stormwater complaints. So there's nothing we can compare to in Canada other than the Nova Scotia Power DRO process. The DRO complaints that go to the Nova Scotia Power DRO are largely billing related, you know, so meter related, was my bill correct, was the correct rate applied, those kind of questions. Whereas the bulk of our complaints are stormwater related. And we did have, as Commissioner Kent noted, some AMI related meter complaints when we were doing our AMI meter installations.
Okay, good, thank you. And there's no motion here required, I don't think so. Okay, folks, I think we have come to the end of our agenda.
If I could add one information item, Commissioner Kent?
Yes.
Okay. In your information package, your information reports, there is one 4.I, the 2021 annual customer survey. I just wanted to get on record and draw your attention to the fact that two of our metrics did improve. One is the customer service index, which increased from 79.5 from 77.9. And the overall perception of the quality of water increased from 96% to 98%. So I just wanted to share that good news with the committee.
Terrific. Terrific. All right, well, I think that's it. Just a second, get my agenda up here.
Sorry, the quick question on the agenda. So the customer survey results and the operational performance information report, this is just for the information purposes. If we have any questions or anything like that, just to reach out offline. Okay, thank you.
And just for future opportunities, if there was any of these that you see periodically that you would like to have considered on the agenda for an open discussion, you are certainly happy to do that. You would just let us know and we'd consider that our agenda setting.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, you can do that at the end of the meeting for the future meeting or just in between. All right, good, thank you. It was a great day, great meeting. Thank you all for attending and being part of it. We need a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Rawlings makes the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. No second is required, so meeting is over.
Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Have a great day.
Everyone.